Council, Chair, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. A couple months ago, I stood here and asked the previous council to approve this small incremental step of allowing duplexes where only luxury detached homes should be built. Today, I'm asking you to support that step by rejecting this motion before you now. I'm a young renter in this city. I make a professional salary, yet I have trouble staying in the city and affording it. And I'm luckier than a lot of people in my generation. And we need homes. We need a lot more choice in what housing we have access to. And that's why I'm asking you today to keep duplexes legal in this city. The facts of the matter are that a detached home in the center of this region, it's going to be a luxury that very few people can afford. But missing middle housing, like the type you saw earlier today, that can be a viable option for my generation. Duplexes were the first small step towards making that missing middle housing more available, but much more still needs to be done. And it's troubling that one of the first moves of this council would be to reverse that small step. RS zones have the lowest percentage of renters in the city. If we're going to build the housing that my generation and the following generations need without causing displacement, the neighborhoods that this change affected are the neighborhoods where we need to build that housing. And watching council earlier today, one would be at risk in being fooled into thinking that this city's greatest problem was a crisis of consultation, not a housing crisis that the members of this council campaigned on addressing. As someone who faces the challenges with this housing market, we don't need another round of consultations, and every delay is just going to make the situation worse. Contrary to what was claimed at the start of this motion and by many others, there's been years of consultation have gone into this. I know the council's new here, and you've all been subjected to a fire hose of new information, but I would suggest looking at the reports that the previous council looked at in November 2017 and June of this year, where they actually laid out what the staff engagement towards the public was, and tens of thousands of Vancouverites participated in the process that led up to the vote that allowed duplexes. And I'm sure the staff here would be happy to walk council through that. And personally, this is my third time addressing council on here. Like, there have been consultations. And at this point, it really does seem that calls for more consultations are little more than a thinly veiled excuse to delay the needed changes and to ban the recently legalized duplexes so that a few loud but largely unrepresented voices can get their way and oppose more housing and more neighbors. Council passed a motion calling for a city plan earlier today, and that's great. It's long past time Bartholomew's plan and all its failings got corrected, but don't undo the progress that has been made. If there are improvements to be made, yeah, it should be part of the new city plan, and those neighborhoods should be part of the change going forward. But we shouldn't roll back what progress has been made up to this point. And the choice you make tonight will set the tone for the next 4 years. Will this be a council that puts affordable housing and available housing as its top priority, or will it be a council that lets a few loud, unrepresented voices close the door on affordable and available housing for thousands of Vancouverites struggling in this crisis? I trust you will make the right decision.
Okay, thank you so much. You have some questions, so if you want to remain at the stand, that's great. Councillor DeGenova?
Thank you very much for waiting this out. I'm starting to think that only independently wealthy people can come to speak to council because, I mean, we're going on to hour 12 here. So thank you for staying.
Well, it's...
I'm not saying that that's what you are. I'm just saying that it's hard for most people to come out to speak. So thank you.
You're welcome. And the only reason I could is because this actually ran long enough. I was off work by the time this came around. I signed up not knowing whether I could speak.
Okay. Thank you very much for that information. I had a question for you on your comments about illegal duplexes. So we do have some areas in the city that do allow duplexes and where duplexes are permitted. Were you referring specifically to the RS zones before the enactment of the amendment to the zoning bylaw?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Another question is I'm grappling with, I was here for that public hearing. Myself and Councillor Carr were the only ones who sat through those speakers on this side of the table. And what I also heard was from individuals who want duplexes, but some, and with my experience in land use and housing and development, I'm wondering what do you think of the idea that this could, in fact, a person now in an RS zone could say, I can build a duplex, so if someone comes to assemble my land, I'm going to sell at the same price as the next 6 homes down the street. They can now all build duplexes. So we've, in a sense, and I'm saying this is what was said to us, we've artificially lifted the land on that. So for someone building a Rental 100 project or another type of housing or something that's even denser than a duplex, that could be more expensive. I'm wondering if you have an opinion on that.
Well, from what I read in the staff report for that public hearing is that the changes were such that there was going to be no FSR change and that other limits on the changes were going to help minimize any speculative changes in land value. And I'd also refer to when the Laneway House program was enacted, where there was very little change in land value as a result of that, despite a significant increase in buildable floor area across the city being allowed.
So duplexes, you can stratify them and sell them as 2 separate homes. Laneway homes, you can't stratify them and sell them as 2 separate homes. Do you see that creating an artificial land lift? Just in some areas?
I don't think that's particularly likely, and I'm basing this off what was in the staff report.
Okay. Would you like to see some areas that were more dense than duplexes? And again, you don't have to answer any of my questions.
No, I'm happy to answer, and yes, as I said, I think this is the first step and a very small step towards a higher and better land use for a significant area of the residential zones, which are currently artificially constrained. That's really hurt in our housing affordability.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's more questions, so thanks very much, Councillor DeGenova. Councillor Weeb.
Yeah, thanks, Scott, for coming. You talked about how there's no extra square footage, no real raise in land values. Why do you think that the public consultation was so divisive during those public hearings?
To be honest, I think it wasn't so much about the question of what it'll do to land values. I think it was a lot more about some people were resistant to the change in their neighborhoods, and it really ended up being, I think, more a cultural issue on where they saw the city going more than any particular land value change.
And follow up, I mean, you said there was a lot of public consultation, but when we were here in the chambers, and I think I saw you in the chambers those days, it was very divisive age group as well. Do you think that is part of what this is making, a very divisive policy that is changing kind of what we're looking for with the citywide plan, which you think could change policy?
I definitely think that's an issue. I mean, the housing crisis definitely, I think, affects my generation more than the generation that was largely represented among the people opposing this change. And I think that's largely just a function of the fact that they were able to buy in when housing was a lot more affordable, and that's no longer the case. And the planning assumptions that worked back when they were buying homes in the 70s, 80s, and 90s no longer reflect the needs of a modern Vancouver.
Thank you.
Great. Councillor Dominato.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Scott, for coming up this evening, and thank you for, as Councillor DeGenova noted, being patient. I just want to follow up on a comment you made around, you referenced the city plan that we approved earlier today, and I think we're all very excited about that. And how do you see this conversation that we're having this evening fitting in with the citywide plan?
Well, ideally, I'd like to see the course that was set largely under the previous council of increasing the available housing options continue into the new city plan. There was talk about triplexes, fourplexes, and low-rise apartment buildings in all neighborhoods of the city, and I think that's the direction the city needs to move in, and I hope that when the next phases of the making room go to council that they will be approved.
Thank you.
That's all your questions. Thanks very much for staying.
Thank you.